For a long time, mission agencies only sent people where you could go and get a missionary visa. And the assumption was, well, that's what we can do, so that's what we will do. The fact is that the Great Commission does not say, go and make disciples of all the countries that'll let you in. It says of all peoples. And we have an obligation to take the gospel to those areas and those people groups whose governments right now will not welcome you in with a missionary visa. So sometime in the 80s, a number of mission agencies began experimenting with what we euphemistically call creative access. Creative access simply means figuring some way other than with a missionary visa to get to people who need to hear the gospel. Initially, a lot of those efforts were sort of anything goes. I just go in and tell them I'm here to do anything if they'll give me a visa for it. Well, that didn't last real long for obvious reasons. Missionary types, the people who have gone through like Bible college and then seminary, don't tend to be qualified for much of anything other than preaching the gospel. They tend, though, to be most comfortable with humanitarian aid, with relief and development, and those sorts of things. So the next phase, I would say, of creative access was the use of non-government organizations, NGOs, which are basically relief and development type organizations. And that went just fine for a while. However, I can say, for instance, in the former Soviet Union, that the government quickly realized that if you were there under an NGO, you were probably either CIA or a missionary. And whether it's true or not, the rumor spread that when the revolutions happened in Ukraine and Georgia, in which the authoritarian post-Soviet governments were overthrown, that the CIA had made use of NGOs to instigate those revolutions. And increasingly, NGO work was just plain shut down. We actually began saying the day of the NGO was over. But here's the interesting thing. Even in countries that shut down most, if not all, of the foreign NGO work, if someone was there doing a legitimate for-profit business, they were left alone, even if they were very open in their witness and very open in helping to train believers. We had one guy who was in a post-Soviet Muslim country who was an accountant and had a very legitimate accounting firm. He was also very open in his witness. He didn't hear a word from the government when the government was shutting down all the rest of this work. So the cutting edge for us right now is business as mission. It's not a new thing. The Nestorians, when they spread their message across Asia during the early Middle Ages, did it largely through merchants. The advantages of business as mission are that it helps people understand why you're there. I mean, if you're there and they can't see that you're making anything off of it, they're suspicious of you. If you're there and you're running a business, well, that makes perfect sense to most people. It also gives you relational access. So, for example, in one country, one of our business platforms was an art gallery. And that art gallery gave some believers access to an art community that no one had ever had any access to before, simply because they were rubbing shoulders. On another side of the coin, there were people who were there doing coffee roasting and distribution, and they had access to a whole industry, restaurants and hotels, that no one else had access. So it gives you relational access, and also it is often, hopefully, financially an easier thing to do if you're actually making some money rather than relying on support, because sadly, since 2008 and the economic downturn, the amount of money available for mission support, even though Americans are incredibly wealthy by international standards, has actually dropped. So it requires a new kind of worker, a kind of worker who has a genuine dual competence, who is skilled and qualified to handle the Word of God, and who also can do something that an anti-Christian government will regard as valid and legitimate. The people we most need are well-discipled businessmen and engineers. Of course, we've always been able to use doctors and nurses. We can use lawyers. Pretty much any profession that you can do here, you can use as a means of gaining access to a place where missionaries, as missionaries, cannot go.